very feisty female.
Thank you. I'll take that as a compliment.
And a wonderful woman. MEG PHILP.
I first heard the story I'm going to try and tell you 30 years ago in Toronto in Canada. And it was the kind of story that I never forgot. And I used to think, gee, I wish I'd listened more carefully so I could tell it again. And it's been bugging me for 30 years, every now and again, because I couldn't remember the name of the woman in the story. So, you know, the wonders of the internet. I sort of played around with some of the key things that happened, and I found her. And this is her story as best as I can tell it. The year was 1806, and there was great excitement in Stromness in Orkney because the Hudson Bay Company had come into harbour and were enlisting men to come and work in the New World, to go across the great ocean and to explore, to make money. If you were a good labourer, a man and a steersman, you could make £32 a year. And they'd give you a contract for 3. But if you were just a simple labourer, you got £8 a year and a contract for 3. There was a young woman. She was 25 by this time. She was one of 7 children, farm labourers, people who worked out for others. Her best friend was her brother, George. George had signed up the year before and gone to Rupert's Land. That's what they called Canada first up. Rupert, not Rupert the Bear, Rupert's Land. And she missed him. And when she thought of what chances she had on Orkney, the bare, treeless, hard-working farms where she worked as a labourer. She would not do any housework. She had 3 sisters that could do that. But she worked for the men. And now that the boys had gone, a lot of them, you see, Hudson Bay Company liked the Orkney men. They kept close together. They were hard-working. They were used to extreme climate. So, Isabel, as she was known, Isabel Forrester, she decided, well, she wouldn't marry. She'd go. I think she just went and helped herself to her father's clothes. She dressed up, wore them, went down to where the Prince of Wales was tied up at anchor. And there was a man on what was the quay. At that stage it was pretty shaky. And she signed up as John Lobster. And she kept the cap pulled down and pulled tight. And she was accepted as a labourer. £8 a year. Women, she could work for 10 years before she ever got £8. Well, it's as quick as she could get back home again and back again. I don't know that she told anybody, but you know, you could imagine once she went back on the ship and the Orkney men were there, they would have twigged who she was. Some of them would have worked alongside her in the fields. But, as I said, they were close, the Orkney men. Nobody said anything. In the 3 months it took them to get over to Rupert's Land and Hudson Bay, she worked on the ship. She got on well with everybody. She liked the hammock. Up first, in last. And she kept herself to herself. She was a hard worker, made herself known to the captain, and he gave her a few jobs and she earned a bit of money. But she had to remember to call herself John, and that was it. She was well thought of. By the time they got to Hudson Bay, well, she was just part of the brigade. They were shipped up on to Fort Albany, and that's where they would be doing canoe expeditions down the river, you know, taking furs and provisions to some of the stations, some of the forts. And there was a man, of course. I think she might have had a little thing with him before they got on board the boat, but This John Scarth, well, he was one of the 32-pounders, you see. And that would have been quite a catch, but nobody knows what happened, because after they'd been working about a year in the brigade, doing this and that and the other, and going to different forts around the place, they got sent to different directions. She was asked, and she was promoted, she got a raise. She was asked if she would go, well, John was asked, on this trip along the Red River. And the Red River, the trip, was 18,000 kilometres. And she said, of course, yes, it'd be a 4-month trip. And what an adventure. The things that she would see there, she had heard about it. I mean, the trees were beautiful around Hudson Bay, but they said that the land was beautiful along the Red River Valley. So, she went, and they paddled. And when they came to rapids, they picked up their canoes and carried them up over the side and then put them back in again. They slept underneath their canoes. They camped every night by the side of the river. And that was how she got to see what a wonderful place this was. The size of the trees. Orkney's treeless. The size of these great beasts, they were like deer. She was in awe of it. And by the time they got to their landing place at Penimba, it was winter coming on. And she was wearing more clothes than usual, trying to keep the cold out. And when they got to Penimba, it was a great celebration. Everybody was glad of the provisions, and it was near Christmas time. And there were 2 stations there at Penimba. One belonged to the North West Company, and the other to Hudson Bay. And they had a custom that when Christmas came, they would swap brigades over, and so the hosts would take the company that was usually opposing them, and so on. So John went across to the Northwest House, the big house in the fort, and celebrated Christmas. Alex Hendry was a factor there, and he was a bit taken aback when John came to him after the Christmas dinner and said he wasn't feeling well, could he lie down? And said, oh, yeah, just go into the next room, there's a lovely fire, lie down. And I never thought any more of it, got things sorted out, and then went back again, because he could hear terrible calls, cries. When he opened the door, there was John lying in front of the fire in terrible pain, calling out. And when Henry went forward to him, he heard a woman's voice, and she begged for help because she was in labour. He couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it. So she showed him that John was a woman, and within the hour, a fine baby boy was born. Now, she'd worked for Hudson Bay for a year, and almost a year and a half. And here was this baby boy, but was she going to be working with the boys after that? Oh, no. The gossip went around, Hudson Bay heard about it. She was, once the baby was fine, shipped back down the river to Fort Albany. And there, even though she pleaded and they knew what a good worker she was, she could labour with the best of them. Oh no, she was made to be the washerwoman for the brigade. So the men that she used to work with, she did the laundry. And I have to tell you, since she was always a labourer, she didn't do a very good job. And it was that way that Hudson Bay really couldn't keep her. The policy was no European white women were ever going to work for Hudson Bay. They had women in posts, of course, but they were Indigenous women who did this, that, and the other. But as far as Isabel and this child that she had, now, I forgot to tell you, when the baby was christened, she had him named James Scarth. And she decided to change her name. She admitted to Isabel, but she decided to have Gunn. I wonder why. So she became Isabel Gunn. And so Hudson Bay, would have nothing to do with it. As soon as her contract was up, the 3 years, she was put back on the Prince of Wales and shipped back to Orkney. Now you can imagine the greeting she got in Stromness. Single, with a child, no husband. She was ostracized. She had to find somewhere to live. I'd like to think that her mother came to see her once or twice, but the sisters maybe not. And she had to make as best she could. A census says that in the 1830s, she was living in a house with children. 1840s, she was a vagrant. That meant she had no fixed abode. She did manage, it said in the survey, to make a living from knitting socks. And the next survey said that she was a sock knitter and a mitten knitter. And she went on till she died at the age of 81, surviving as best she could. And I'd like to think that, you know, on her tombstone, they might have given some recognition to the great first European woman to ever set foot in what now is now Manitoba. It was North Dakota as well. But no, on her tombstone it said, knitter of socks. And it's a true story.
Wow.
It's true as I'm standing here.
Now, I believe your supper is ready.